This is Ernest Gordon. Ernest Gordon grew up in Scotland and attended St. Andrew's University and studied philosophy. As he was finishing his degree, though, the world started to change, and he started to recognize the coming of World War II. And he felt compelled that he should join the fight. So Ernest joined the Scottish Highlanders in 1939, and for the first year and a half, he was successful in each battle he was part of. But in 1949, he was captured by the Japanese army and brought to a base in Burma. And on that base in Burma, everything changed for Gordon. Because all the successes that he had in life, all the benefits, all of his wisdom disappeared. And he and thousands of other men were forced to build what we now refer to as the Death Railway. A railway that runs the entire border of Burmese. A railway that, depending on the numbers that you find, was the death of over 500,000 men. And in the middle of building this railway, Ernest Gordon found himself becoming sick. And as he became overwhelmed by diphtheria, in the POW camp, the soldiers decided he wasn't worth anything. And they put him in what they referred to as the death hut, a place to go and die. And they left men there. They didn't feed them because they weren't worthy of food, and they didn't give them water because they weren't worthy of drink, because those were provided for the men who were working and building the railway. And as Ernest sat there laying, wondering when he would take his final breath, two men entered the hut. Two fellow soldiers, one a Methodist and the other a Roman Catholic. And those two men approached Gordon and they said, "Captain, are you okay if we nurse you back to health?" And taking shifts and working with Gordon 24 hours a day, when they weren't on the railway, they were with Gordon, sharing their meals, sharing their water. And over time, Ernest Gordon starts to get better. And eventually, he regains all of his health, and he joins the rest of his soldiers. And he began to ask the question, what is it about these two men that would cause them to give up everything to save me? And so he said, the only thing that's different about them is that they believe in something far greater than I do. Because Gordon walked into that war a self-proclaimed agnostic, not sure if God could really exist. And he started to think, maybe I should study what they're doing. Maybe I should learn from what they're seeing, because they face death in a way that I never could. And so Ernest, with the help of a couple other men, built a small church just off the side of the camp. And in that church, he started to study the Bible. Still not sure he believed, but the more Ernest studied, the more other people started to take notice. And eventually they were asking him. They said, "Can you teach us what you're learning? Can we study with you?" And amazing things started to happen, because the lives of these soldiers started to change. They started to recognize that they had a purpose beyond just living another day. They had a purpose to live a life for God. And their captors started to take notice, because these men started to work harder than everybody else. And when they saw somebody starting to fall behind or somebody hurt, they took care of them. They'd see somebody from another camp who was sick, and they'd help nurse them. And amazingly, that railway, the railway we call the Death Railway, because of these men, was finished 6 months early. And slowly, those men started to get more benefits within the camp because they were doing things They were working at a different rate. They were showing a different character. And after 3.5 years in that POW camp, when the war came to an end, Ernest Gordon walked out alongside his other soldiers. And he looked around and he said, I will live the rest of my life with purpose, caring for others the way those men cared for me. It's amazing what happens when we recognize our life has purpose beyond the momentary. Our life has purpose beyond the day-to-day 9 to 5, go to work and come home. And today, we're going to take a deeper look at what that purpose is. Because if you've been with us for the last 9 weeks or so, we've been sitting in what's so often referred to as the upper room discourse. John has spent the last 4 chapters in his book walking us through the character of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the heart of Jesus, something that differs from all the other Gospels. Where each of the other Gospels spends a handful of verses in the upper room in the days of Passover, John says this is the time to truly understand who Jesus is. And now, as that meal comes to a close, John starts to introduce us to another piece of Jesus. He allows us a deeper insight into who Jesus is in his relationship with the Father and with God, because he turns now to the way Jesus prays. We start in John 17, verses 1 through 5. And in verses 1 and 2, we read, After Jesus said this, he looked toward heaven and prayed, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. And at first, this is a great and beautiful statement. But the true depth of this statement is, this isn't a simple prayer. This is a prayer of sacrifice. In this moment, Jesus is praying to the Father to prepare himself for the sacrifice that he's about to partake in. In that first moment, that first piece of this sacrifice is an awareness of the moment he's in. We've heard 17 times in the book of John, Jesus mention his time. We've heard him mention his hour. Beginning in chapter 2, at the wedding in Cana, when his mother says, hey, we're out of wine, can you help us out? And Jesus' response is, woman, my time hasn't come yet. And then when he meets a woman, a Samaritan woman at the well, and she asks Jesus, how can I worship? And Jesus says, oh, a time is coming when you won't need a special place to worship. You'll be able to worship wherever because God will be with you. And then John reminds us later on as the Jewish persecutors are chasing Jesus down and wanting to arrest him, that the only reason they couldn't arrest him was because his time hadn't come. Time and the hour of Jesus is a central figure within the book of John. And here John's saying, all this waiting, all this tension has now finally come to a head, and that time has come. And Jesus in this moment says, hey, God, I'm ready. I'm ready to deliver on the task that you have assigned me to do. But before we do that, God, I need you to glorify me. Glorify me that I may glorify you. This is not some self-proclaiming statement. This is not Jesus saying, make me great, Father. Right? This is a prayer that would have been said by the priests as they prepared the sacrifice. It's a prayer for acceptance. These are Jesus' words to the Father, saying, Father, I have done the work that you have called me to. Allow my body, accept my death as a sacrifice worthy of you. So often in our world, we think of glory and we look and the immediate thought is, right? We win a championship, we bring glory to the city that we play for. We make the Olympics and we bring glory to the company, or to the country that we live in. But Jesus isn't talking about his own glory. He's asking for worthiness. He's asking for God to look down and recognize that he has completed the task that was placed in front of him. Allow my sacrifice and my body to be accepted. The third thing that he does here in this prayer for sacrifice is he acknowledges purpose. In verse 3, we read that Jesus says, "For you granted him authority over all people, that he might give eternal life to all those you have given him." There's a purpose to this sacrifice. There's a purpose to who Jesus was. And in this moment, he declares it to the Father. You sent me for one reason: to be able to reconcile a broken world and a broken relationship. You granted me authority over these people, not that I should rule like they expected me to rule, but that I would be able to lay my life down for them so that they would be able to be with you again. He prays, recognizing the moment he's in, asking that he can be worthy of that moment, and declaring the purpose for that moment. And as he prepares himself and seeks those things, he then changes a little bit. And he goes, Father, here's what this is all about. Verse 3 through 5 says, "Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began." Eternal life is knowing you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ. God, I'm ready to lay down my life for this sacrifice so that they can know you again. It's easy to look at this word know, though, from a human perspective, right? This isn't an intellectual no. This isn't, God, I'm laying down my life that these people may be able to read about you in a book on a Sunday morning and feel good about it and walk away. It's not what it is. This word know is relational. This word know is to develop a deeper understanding, to be moved, to have your character adjusted. It says, this is eternal life, that they may learn you. They may become more like you. That they may be marked by you. It's relational. But it gets deeper because within that relationship, it's covenantal. This call to know God is not a simple call because God used this same term in Jeremiah. And then it's repeated again in Hebrews. In Isaiah 31 and repeated in Hebrews 8. Where God says that to know God is a descriptor of the new covenant. He'll no longer use tablets or the oral words of priests or the prophets to declare who he is, that people might know who he is, but he will write on their hearts. He will build a covenant with them. He will be in them and with them. They will know him deeply and will be part of him. See, the call to eternal life is to know God and to learn him, to recognize that no matter the appeal of the other things in our lives, that he is the one that provides peace and joy. It's this covenantal relationship. I remember I first met Mary Beth when I was 15. Anybody meet their spouse when they were 15? Anybody remember being 15? She sat behind me in math class. And I looked at her and I'm like, oh, she is good looking. And I needed to get her attention. And I, at 15, had size 15 feet. And I was barely 6 feet tall, so little Ronald McDonald. But I was like, that's how you get her attention. And I put my feet up on the desk right next to her, and she did not find that attractive. I knew she was beautiful, but I didn't know anything about her. And over the course of the next 8 years, our friendship grew. And I started to learn little things about her. It started to intrigue me a little bit more. I learned the way she loved, the way she cared. But also, I learned that she started to like me a little bit more. That made me feel good, but you know what? The moment I learned that, I was 19. Anybody remember being 19? And so, me being the 19-year-old I was, I looked at her and said, I'm sorry, but I'm in college and there's lots of girls around. There's lots of distractions. There's lots of other things that are appealing to me right now, and I'm just not ready for you. And it took another 5 years to be broken down. 5 years, but so much so that 5 years later, we were sitting around wondering what we're going to do for a 3-day weekend. And Mary Beth looked at me and she said, well, you want to get married? And I said, yeah. 6 days later, in front of our friends and family in Lake Tahoe, we were married. Because here's the thing, when you realize that you love somebody more than just for their beauty, but for who they are, you're ready to drop it all. And you live your life right alongside them. But here's the thing, I thought I loved her then. But we've been married now 23 years. Do you know what I've learned about her in 23 years? I've learned that she loves service. Not only does she love for me to do things for her, and that's how she feels loved, but she would give up anything in order to serve somebody else because she just wants them to feel that same love. I've learned that who she is translates to every other person around her. And it's so beautiful. I've learned that I can sit through a Hallmark movie. Right? But here's the thing. That's that covenantal love that happens when we spend every waking hour with somebody. When we walk with them. Pieces of them start to take over who we are. And John's saying that's what happens when we know God. When we know God, when we're willing to sit in that relationship with God, it starts to write on our heart and it starts to change things. But if we're honest, some of us in this room are still dating. Some of us in this room are all right going out on a date with God on a Sunday morning, but we don't really want to introduce him to our friends yet. Some of us love God, but we're not willing to put a ring on that finger because we're scared of what the next step is. And John says, but that's eternal life. It's to step through the fear and to fill the promise. We get stuck so much, though, when we get in those two other categories where we're not willing to move beyond the superficial relationship to where we don't see the entirety of what eternal life is. Because what eternal life is this return to the relationship we were created to be in. So we look at verse 5 here. Jesus asks something that sounds very similar to verse 2, but there's a small nuance in it. And he says, glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began. The nuance is this is a different word for glory than earlier. He's not saying make me worthy. See, this word for glory is the manifestation of God. And Jesus' statement is, I have done what we sent me to do. I have fulfilled the purpose that I was brought here to do. Bring me back home. Bring me back to the relationship that fulfills me and makes me whole. That same relationship that we find in Genesis 2, where after God's created the earth and the sky, the land and the sea, he turns to himself and he says, let us create something in our image. We were created in the image of that same intimacy that Jesus is asking the Father to have again. This same covenantal intimacy. And that's the eternal life that Jesus is saying he's bringing. This restoration. And the beauty of it is you don't have to wait. Right? You don't have to wait because he said it right there. Eternal life starts now. So often we can get stuck in the not yet part of eternal life. We can get stuck in this element that goes, man, life sucks and it's hard and I don't want to do this anymore. But won't it be great when I'm with God? Everything will be great when I get to heaven. And man, if only things could be here like they're going to be in heaven. And I can't wait to be at God's feet when I'm in heaven. But the reality is, and what Jesus is telling us is we can sit there and look all the time at heaven, but we're going to miss what's going on right here and right now. See, the beauty of eternal life is it sits in two realities. And part of that reality is that it sits in this element of not yet. That restoration, we know it's not fully complete, right? We know the world's broken. We know it hurts to go outside sometimes, and it hurts to interact with people, and sometimes it's our own family that says stuff. And it's so hard to get over it. And so in those moments, we can rest and sit and know that there's something better later on. But when we sit in that for too long, when we're too scared to go outside, when we're too scared to live in the now, and all we want to do is sit in that not yet of the eternal life, we're limiting the promise that Jesus is providing to us here. See, so often when we look at it, when we look at our relationship with Jesus, we want to look and we want to ask, what should I do? Life seems in disarray. I'm looking for purpose. God, what should I do? And when we take out our magic 8-ball that's God, and we shake it, and it says, not sure, ask again later. Maybe if we're lucky, it says, no, not yet. But here's the thing. if your only relationship with God is one that's being used when you're unsure about your own actions or what you should do next, he's nothing more than a magic 8-ball. He's nothing more than not yet. And the beauty is that he's now. And that relationship with him is now. See, that question of what should I do when we live in the now moment of eternal life changes. It becomes, who should I be? Who should I be? Father, who should I be? Who are you? What does your character say? What is your heart? How do you love? Where do you see beauty? See, knowing God is living in a relationship with him that should change our focus, should redirect our eyes towards him. And when that happens, we begin to measure truth and mercy and grace through him. We begin to recognize the value through his eyes. We begin to recognize need and oppression in our communities. And instead of turning our back on it, we respond in a way that only God can. And when we grow in our knowledge, Christ's purpose becomes our purpose. That purpose of sharing eternal life becomes ours. The promise of something greater is shared through the life that we live. Right? Paul reminds us this when he writes to the Ephesians, and he says, walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us, and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice for God. When you know God, you can walk like God. You can walk with God. At Meadowbrook, we say our mission is to invite people to discover Jesus, to become his fully devoted followers, and to influence the world. When we live a life eternal, we start to do that. We start to become that fully devoted follower that influences the world. The beauty of that word influence, though, it's a simple word that in Latin just means to flow. To flow. Like a small stream through a field. And over time, the power of that water, though minimal, though not recognized, starts to wear down the sides of the field and starts to expand. And as it flows, it grows bigger. And that stream becomes a river. And that river becomes an ocean. And the impact becomes greater and greater as we allow the flow of God to influence others through us. See, Ernest Gordon, he followed through on his promise. He left that concentration camp, that POW camp, and he knew he had to do something different, and he knew that life would be different because he knew who God was, and he knew what it meant to live with the purpose of eternal life. So that man went back to school, became a minister. And after years in the field, he became the dean of Princeton University. And after his death, Princeton wrote this about Gordon. It said, Gordon was the founder and first president of the Church Service Society of America. He also served as trustee of the Purcell School and the chair of the New Jersey Mental Health Research and Development Fund. After retiring from the university in 1981, Gordon moved to Washington, D.C. to be the president of the Christian Rescue Effort for the Emancipation of Dissidents. And in that role, he helped several hundred dissidents get out of prison in Eastern Bloc countries. A life lived eternal, and a life with purpose. Isn't it amazing what God can do with a small stream of influence, with two men willing to sacrifice their time to nurse another man back to health, when that stream has eternal impact? See, this is the promise of eternal life. The promise found in the once and true pure sacrifice of Christ, that we're restored to a life lived in a relationship with one true God. A relationship that calls us to a greater purpose, and a purpose that divinely influences the world around us through the character and through the love of God.